Tell us a bit more about the importance of early childhood development.
So early learning is one of those really unique areas of public policy where all of the interests of major political parties actually end up in the same place, and that is that we need more better quality early learning for Australia's young people. We know that early learning is really important for female workforce participation, but it's also, very importantly, the best weapon against intergenerational inequality that we know. Early learning is the most efficient and effective way of getting young people who are growing up in really low income households up to the standard of the average young person. Now, this is super important because we know that there are developmental differences between kids growing up in really high income households and really low income households that we can observe when children are as young as 18 months old. 4-year-old young people in Australia are twice as likely to be developmentally delayed when they're growing up in a really low income home compared to a high income home. And there's lots of really understandable reasons why that's the case. We also know that early learning's a really efficient way to address inequality. So lots of studies have shown that for every $1 we spend on quality early learning, we get anywhere from around $5 to $9 back. Some studies have shown as much as $17 returned for every $1 spent. When you compare that to, a $4 on every $1 return on investment of a road project, that's kind of considered to be a runaway success. So it makes sense from a budgetary point of view, but it also is really, really effective, and I'm passionate about getting Australia up to standard on this important area of policy.
So the evidence base is really strong, and childcare is something that affects a whole lot of people, so the politics are clear. Why are we still so far behind other countries on this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think for a long time in Australia there was just very little discussion about early learning. So it wasn't really until the Rudd and Gillard governments came to power that early learning was sort of thrust to the top of the policy agenda. And those governments made huge strides forward, especially in the enrolment of 4-year-olds. So if you cycle back to that kind of when they came to power, Australia was dire. Today we're still, though, amongst the lowest performers in the OECD on some measures. So despite those really important moves forward. So one of the things that we know is that, for example, the enrolment of children under the age of 4 in Australia is very low compared to other countries. That's an area we need to address. But we also know that the young people in Australia who are least likely to go to early learning are the kids that need it most, and those are the kids who are growing up in disadvantaged households. We also know that kids who are going to early learning when they're in a disadvantaged households are likely to be accessing early learning that's lower quality on average than other kids. So there's some really big problems there that we need to address, and it just takes a bit of political will and passion and interest from our politicians.
So you're working on a book, can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I'm working on a book called Two Futures, and I'm writing that with Tim Watts, who's the member for Gellibrand and a really good friend of mine. Tim and I sat together when we were elected to Parliament, and one of the things that often struck us as we sat through another depressing question time was that the Parliament's very occupied by issues that are affecting day-to-day life in politics, but the really fundamental long-term issues that are affecting Australia don't go, they're sort of going undiscussed by the nation's parliament. So we're writing a book about what those issues are, what are the 6 things that will define our quality of life in Australia in 2040, and what should we be doing about them.
So the Fabians are Australia's oldest progressive think tank. Do we still need progressive think tanks, or we've got smart people in the parliament now with all the right ideas? Is that time past, or what role do they play?
Oh goodness, not at all. I mean, the best thing that we can do for progressive governments in Australia and in really any country in the world is have a thriving community of people who are engaging and debating and talking about the ideas that really matter. I think when you look at lots of things that Labor governments have done in the past that have really changed and shaped Australia, many of those ideas would have come out of think tanks just like the Fabian Society. So it makes me incredibly happy to come to an event like today and see so many people, especially young people, here to talk about ideas.
So apart from early childhood development, which we've covered, is there another big idea or another issue that you're passionate about which just isn't getting any airtime or as much as it deserves, which you just want to, you wish people would pay more attention to? Yeah,
absolutely. The other idea that I'd mention is about the success of Australia's mainstream education system, so primary and secondary education. When we look at what's driven Australian prosperity over the last generation, having a skilled population's been right at the heart of it. And we've, for a long time, had one of the best education systems in the world, but that's finished now. We don't have one of the best education systems in the world anymore. When we compare ourselves to other countries, we're down around somewhere around 19th best in the world in maths and 13th in English. And the countries that have burst ahead of us are the Asian countries that we have, I think, traditionally thought of as the ones that, you know, Australia would have the great ideas and would get them manufactured in Asia. That's not where we're heading right now. So I think Australian governments need to ask themselves a really difficult question about what is it that Australia's young people are going to be able to do that our Asian neighbours can't do better and more cheaply than we can. And if we can't answer that question, then we're not looking ahead to a prosperous future as a country.